Marvel Anime is kind of a stupid name. Fun fact, Marvel was a lot more transparent about their intentions with this project than I thought they would. They literally said, there is great room for us to grow our brands in these countries. No artistic intent behind this project? Okay. By the way, in case you don't know, Marvel Anime was basically this series of anime incarnations produced by Madhouse of characters like Ironman, Wolverine, X-Men, and such. It started airing in 2010 and ended in 2011, but later they released 2 other straight-to-DVD movies because why not, I guess. I'm gonna give all of these shows a look because thankfully they're not that long. I'm starting with Ironman because, like the MCU, it was the first incarnation. Now, I wasn't 100% sure what to expect from this series. It has a 6.2 on my anime list, and it's quite rare for shows to be rated below 7 on that website. So I guess I should have expected to not enjoy Ironman, but I actually was willing to give it a chance, but it kinda sucks. I mean, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's definitely something I would consider to be no further than average. What might be my biggest issue is that the stories in each episode are incredibly boring. They've been setting up the evil Zodiac organization since the beginning of the series, but each episode would have a premise that would revolve around an episodic disposable villain or obstacle, which is fine, but a lot of these villains were poorly fleshed out, which made them really forgettable and uninteresting. The most interesting out of the disposable ones was Shaw, even though I had an issue with how his mother would throw around a bunch of life-defining lectures to his son in strange situations that just kind of felt forced. But then you would get guys like that fucking racer who agreed to kill Iron Man just so he can race again. No psychoanalysis on his sense of morality, emotional stability, and decision making. No, he just wants to race. This level of motivational depth is compared to the ones of the villains from Miraculous Ladybug. Although at least in that series, they're being manipulated and partially controlled by Hawkmoth, and also that series is going for a sillier tone. But anyway, the worst part about this is that since every conflict is episodic, you already know that Iron Man will win, so now you have predictable premises with boring obstacles that you don't care about, and you only really get a little bit interesting when they reference Zodiac, since it's clear that they're building something. I guess the most interesting villain would be Yinsen, not only because he had a history with Tony Stark, since he was the one who inspired Tony to be a better person, and seeing him going against what inspired Tony to be what he is created an emotional beef between him and Tony, but also because he was a reoccurring villain, which made the outcomes less predictable. However, I do think he was poorly handled in the end, not only because they established that Yinsen still wants to achieve peace and resents Tony Stark for creating a weapon that can be used for destruction, except you're the one who's replicating Tony's weapons and blowing up shit, and you're currently using a weapon that can be used for destruction but in the name of safety, just like what Tony Stark is doing. Oh no, but it's different. I'm blowing up that building because I want to prove that Tony's gadgets are dangerous, but I still want to avoid deaths. Fucking hypocrite. How about you actually practice what you preach and not join an organization that created tornadoes? You can't do that while also criticizing Iron Man for using dangerous gadgets in an attempt to do the same thing you want, but with different and disagreeable methodologies. And I know he's a villain and I'm not really supposed to agree with his actions, but this guy is just straight up contradicting himself. It's fine if he doesn't agree that Tony's methods are effective, but criticizing him for using destructive weapons even though he's doing the same thing is very hypocritical. It was also revealed in the end that he partially did all of this because he was feeling powerless, although this realization came out of nowhere with no initial setup for the epiphany, and I guess he's on Iron Man's side right now before he dies. I think this self-realization could have been a well-handled moment of character development if more time was given. For me, this last phase of his overall character arc just felt kind of rushed, but at least he was infinitely more interesting than the main boss who was behind all of the evil schemes but was also a cliche one to bring new order type of villain. There was a moment between him and Sakurai where the music was all touching and they were talking about how they saw themselves as father and son, and just kind of felt like I was supposed to find that scene a lot more emotional than I did, but I didn't because I don't care about their relationship since it wasn't that well fleshed out. Overall, the guy was boring. He was a generic boring villain and you'll never remember. Now that I think about it, the only two characters I genuinely like are Tony Stark, who, while I don't think he's as charismatic as the series probably wanted him to be, he's likable and has the best development. The other one was Aki, who had a tragic and interesting backstory, and her bond with Tony was admittedly touching. Besides these two, and I guess Chika and Sakurai, who can be somewhat likable exclusively when they're around Tony, everyone else sucks. Nanami was not that entertaining, and her obsession with interviewing Tony was pretty dull, even if she would have eventually grown fond of Tony as she spent more time looking into him. The fact that this was the extension of their relationship made her kind of bland. As for the art of the show, the background music was really unmemorable and unimpactful. It just sounded kind of vapid, and the only score you'll ever remember is the main one, obviously because it's the one they play the most. The opening and closing sequences are pretty dull, but at least the ED has a small sequence that sounds kinda nice, but everything else in the song is not that great. Not to mention, some of their sound effects are kind of obnoxious to listen. In the case for the animation, I don't find the art style to be that appealing, but I can easily look past that. What I can't move past is the action. It ranges from competent to sloppy. To be fair, you'll most likely find the action scenes to be generally serviceable, but you'll also find a lot of moments where it feels like the animation could have been tightened up and better polished. I for one found enough of these moments, but in all fairness, in the last few episodes this became an almost non-issue. So yeah, Ironman is not really that good, unfortunately. 5 out of 10 is the best score I can give. Now let's jump to Clawsman.
That's really creative. He makes ice, call him Iceman. Why not just call Wolverine Clawsman?
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like Wolverine. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect and I'll get to why, but I definitely think this is an improvement from Iron Man, even from the very beginning. In episode 1 of Iron Man, the first 30 minutes were a complete bore, while if you look at Wolverine, they quickly set up Logan's goal, which was to rescue Mariko, a former girlfriend of his, which is more interesting than Tony wanting to understand the culture of Japan and some reporter clinging onto him. And stuff got even more interesting when they killed off Asano, which disrupted the relationship between Logan and the police and made Logan even more vengeful as he wanted to find out who killed Asano, even if it was more of a secondary goal and he became less focused as the series went on. I also like the set of main characters more. I like Logan and Yukio. Yukio is a well-established and developed character who kept my interest from beginning to end, and I like her relationship with Logan as they're partners who share the same destination but also agree that they're not friends, which led to some amusing moments of dialogue. Kikyo was cool and I admire his code of honor. The main villains were more interesting than the ones from Iron Man, and even some of side characters were more likable. I mean, I found Logan's interaction with Cyclops, who only showed up once, to be more entertaining than any of the interactions in Iron Man. But now let's get down to the flaws the series has. Let's start off with what kicked this series off in the first place, which was Mariko. Honestly, I wish Mariko was more fleshed out. Logan plus the series as a whole revolves around saving Mariko, someone who Logan loves, and I wish we would see more of that love. We did have a few moments that highlighted their relationship before she was taken, but it was way too brief and it wasn't long enough to flesh out their chemistry and Mariko as a character, so as a result, it feels like part of the emotional core of the series is missing. I would definitely be much more invested if I connected with her character, which is something that I don't think it's impossible to do while the series is going on. Maybe have a few moments of flashbacks scattered throughout the series. What we got were just moments of Mariko showing that she was unhappy being forced to marry Kurohage, which made her sympathetic but not enough for me to have a strong connection with her. But now let's get down to a character I actually did connect with but I still had my fair share of gripes, which was Ukyo. You know what I really don't like? It's when a character is presented as this ass-kicking badass but her actions doesn't actually reflect that, and Ukyo kind of comes across as that. She's established as this skilled fighter, has a dark backstory that made her broken but tough, wears a badass outfit, has a deep voice and a short haircut. But even though there are moments where I do recognize that she was a big help and definitely had her fair share of ass-kicking moments, there are also a lot of times when she doesn't do anything, either because she was knocked down easily or because, well, I don't know. Like, there are moments where Logan is fighting against someone really powerful and her involvement is just so minimal. I guess it was meant to enhance the narrative of Logan being the ultimate winner and ass kicker, but I don't know, I just kind of hate when shows do that. To be fair, Yukio's case isn't by any stretch the worst case of this, but it's still something I find to be kind of annoying. When someone, usually a female character, is presented as a badass but fails to prove that in many practical scenarios. Anyway, what else am I missing? Oh yeah, the action scenes, they're pretty hit or miss. Funny thing about it is that while Iron Man's fight animation got better as the series progressed, Wolverine kind of had the opposite effect. For instance, let's talk about the violence. There's this moment in episode 3 of Iron Man where Tony saves a child and her mother after the bus they were in had an accident and was about to fall into the ocean or sea or whatever. And even though they should have inevitably received some hard bruises and injuries, they looked pretty fine, which was kind of bullshit. With Wolverine, however, around that period we had seen some fairly bloody moments, which was promising. But then the series kind of wussed out in many scenarios. This was especially annoying whenever we would see characters with sharp weapons attack someone or a number of people, and they would instead show a flashy sequence and implied impact, but didn't actually show the impact in motion, which I probably would have tolerated, but then the victims would never bleed. And it's not like they can't show blood, because they can, not that they look that great anyway, which brings me back to my original point. Initially, while watching this series, my biggest and probably only gripe with the animation was that whenever the shots were from a long distance, the movements looked really janky. But episode after episode, the overall animation just got shittier. Just like with Iron Man, the fight scenes are generally serviceable, and there's even this one sequence with Ukyo that looked really cool, but there are also several moments that deserve some extra cleanups. The music was mediocre, there's a lot of generic action-driven rock music, as if the generic orchestral music wasn't tiring enough, although in Wolverine's defense, I actually found 2 of their musical scores to be quite memorable, unlike before when it was just 1. Anyway, 6 out of 10, not a bad score.
マドリプール行きは中止。ニューヨークへ行き先変更だ。
Iceman is certainly better than both Iron Man and Wolverine. It's also the most different, not only because it's the only one without a single defined protagonist, but also because it's the one with the most distinct art style. The facial features have realistic proportions compared to the previous incarnations, which I have to say this art style doesn't necessarily work in their favor. I mean, I definitely missed Logan's design from Wolverine. I think he looked cooler there, but whatever. I guess he had to look more animalistic given his updated mutant powers and also a little bit of his personality. Anyway, I also have to say that there were a few shots where certain characters had awkward facial expressions. I think Hisoka was the guiltiest of this, and also one other thing that I'll address later. This series takes place after the Phoenix Saga, and we witness the team, particularly Cyclops, having to deal and cope with Jean's death. Scott was definitely one of the driving keys of the series, which was helped by the fact that his decision making was very easy to understand, as you could find a connection between every single action of his with Jean's demise. In my review of Wolverine, I mentioned how we never got to witness the bond between Logan and Mariko, and they never properly characterized Mariko, which would help the audience to root for Logan and empathize with his desire to bring her back more. But with X-Men, even though Jean was barely characterized, I don't think there was much need to do so, because we're witnessing a chapter of Scott's life that doesn't involve her, and the only thing we really need to keep in mind is that Scott was in love with Jean and her death haunts him, which I think it's possible to sync that in with what the show delivered to us. I will say though that I was a little bit disappointed that they never gave us a brief but still fair description of what happened in the events of the Phoenix Saga. I don't think they even properly explained how Jean went berserk, but whatever. 2 other characters that I think were the emotional cores of the series were Frost and Hisoka, in which they had important tie-ins with the main story and their journeys into becoming official members of the X-Men, and gaining Scott's trust and approval were investing in and of themselves. Now, the overall story was definitely engaging, although there were moments where some of the character motivations were confusing as hell. For instance, Mastermind, in an attempt to murder Frost, decided to create an illusion in Scott's head so that he would believe that Frost was responsible for the Jean disaster, which is a ridiculous plan because he's betting on the possibility that Scott and the rest of his teammates will abandon their morals and kill Frost, even though there was a much simpler solution lying in front of him. Mastermind stated that the human were working for the inner circle. All he had to do was order the human to execute Emma when she was kidnapped. Also, Sasaki never really explained why she didn't ask Professor X for help in treating the mutants that were facing Diamond Hulk syndrome and also their son. Like, I understand she wanted to keep all of this research a secret, especially after she started cooperating with the human, but it would be a lot easier if she had just told Charles that she had a baby in the first place. I mean, it was kind of implied that Takeo had a grudge with Charles because he was never there for him, so he gets angry and emotional or something like that, but that doesn't really explain why she didn't initially tell Charles. She literally had no reason to ignore her responsibility to inform Charles that he is a father. It would be a lot safer to just ask Charles for help before she figured out that the human were the ones who could provide organs that could save Takeo. I mean, the X-Men have Henry Convoy, who's a genius. It's insane to me that she never even considered that. And honestly, it's not necessarily that she acted irresponsibly that I'm angry with her character, it's more that I can't understand why she would rationally do this. Like, I know they broke up, but it's not like they left in bad terms. There was no serious grudge between them that I'm aware of. Honestly, they just felt like a plot hole. Also, I have to say, this series did not end in the best way they could have. When the series started, it was mostly about mutants dealing with humans being racist against them, and Cyclops coping with Jean's death, which was working well. But then the last 2 episodes revolved entirely around Takeo, some of the most half-assed and not very well explored plot lines. Like, honestly, who gives a shit about Takeo? There was also a moment where Jean's subconscious or spirit motivated the X-Men to continue to fight, but honestly I found that to be too stupid to even take it seriously. I was also not a big fan of any of the antagonists. Both the Human and the Inner Circle had the potential to be really interesting organizations, but their end goal were way too basic, which reflected very much on Mastermind. Remember how complex and well developed Magneto's character is? Yeah, Mastermind is nowhere near that level. Now, of course, there are other things worth praising. I actually like the opening sequence, which is funny because I don't even think the song is that great. I think it's a pretty typical superhero theme, but I have to admit it's actually kind of memorable and the sequences are not all that great, but they're fine. It's also a lot better than the boring opening sequences from the last 2 series. Also, speaking of which, this is the 3rd time the closing theme has a sequence in the middle of the song where it gets sentimental. Like, is this some kind of trademark of the entire Marvel anime franchise? Finally, to finish off on a negative note, I can't really say this bothered me that much, but sometimes the dialogue would get kind of cheesy and melodramatic, and I think X-Men is the only one out of the Marvel anime shows that possesses this flaw. To bring back something I put on hold, Hisoka was the biggest source of these dumb cheesy moments of dialogue. It's not a huge problem and I can definitely find other superhero incarnations where the cheesiness is even worse, but it did keep me from taking certain scenes as seriously as they wanted me to. Overall, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10 because it was a fairly decent series, even if there are some stupid elements here and there. Okay, so far I'd like to think I've been fair to these Marvel anime shows. I did my best to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses, but with Blade, I cannot write anything even remotely extensive because quite honestly, as I was watching Blade, I was just so constantly bored. It was partially because I was getting sick of this Marvel anime universe. I'm so sick of the unappealing character designs, ugly color palettes, that obnoxious jump scary sound effect I keep hearing. Oh, but wait, Blade is, I guess, more stylized. The background music has a few saxophone and jazzy piano scored moments, I guess. Does it really add to the experience? Not really. I don't fucking care about these changes. If you want to take my interest, maybe you could do something neat with the visual presentation. But that wasn't the case. The action scenes are the same level of entertainment as the previous shows, which is not much. They have moments where they freeze frame, but that's not impressive. The fight scenes are boring and lame. Speaking of boring and lame, I don't really like Eric. I don't think there's anything wrong with his writing, but I don't necessarily find him entertaining. I got an idea of what type of person he is. what led him to be like this and what's meant to be appealing about him in the very first episode, and I guess also later expanded in episodes 2 and 4, but after that I got nothing out of him. I don't care that much for his quest to hunt vampires, it's not all that fun or exciting. I also don't care that much about the vampires organizations called the Existence. The main villain sucked balls, Makoto sucks balls. She wanted to kill Blade in an attempt to avenge his father because Blade killed him, even though it's clear to anyone with a functional brain that he was trying to save her, and if it wasn't for him, her father would have bitten her. I mean, it's fine if she resents him, but you can't say to me that she misinterpreted that scenario and misunderstood Blade to the point where she dedicates her entire time to capture and murder Blade. You were literally right in front of the scene. Anyway, after that she decided to be Blade's partner. Then as you see more of her, you'll realize she has no personality. It was so infuriating watching her death scene and being presented as this sad and heartbreaking moment. Like, dude, she's a boring character and she didn't spend that much time with Blade, at least not enough to develop a strong relationship, so why the fuck are you crying, you stupid baby? Yeah, she was a loyal and helpful partner, I'll admit, but she wasn't that special. You know, it's kind of funny how this is the third time a female partner of the main character ended up dying in the end, but with the previous cases, they were at least not totally incompetently written characters. But to give the show some credit, I think Helsing and Razor the dog are fine and kind of cool, and I enjoy Logan and Kikyo's appearances. They're characters I actually like. Other than that, this was a tedious experience and I fortunately don't have much to say other than the fact that it's boring. The only critical debate in my head is whether or not this is a 4 or a 5. I gave Ironman a 5 and I think that's better than Blade. I actually give a shit about the main character, and unlike Blade, I was mildly interested in giving each episode a look. With Blade, watching every episode just felt like a chore. I mean, with both shows, the episodes would end up disappointing me in the end, but with Blade, before watching each individual episode, I didn't even really want to give it a chance. The only reason I didn't skip Blade was because, well, you know, it's part of this project. But yeah, for now I'm giving Blade a 4 out of 10. It's definitely my least favorite out of the television shows, and now it's time to jump to the movies. And interestingly enough, we're revisiting Ironman. Speak of the devil. I've been noticing a pattern in this Marvel anime series. The villains are not all that good. I did say that the bad guys in Wolverine are interesting, although it's really their goals that are interesting, which is a good thing, but even then I wouldn't really say they're great characters. However, Rise of the Technovore had something, let's say, interesting to offer. They gave a villain who ended up being the most infuriating villain in this entire series, but is infuriating in a way that's different from the previous ones. With Ironman, X-Men, and Blade, my main issue had to do with the fact that they're pretty bland and the writing is very weak. In this movie, I feel like the villain was meant to be deep and complex, but I could not for the life of me understand him. He wants to replace humanity with new technology, except technology is meant to aid humans, so what's the fucking point of all of this? I guess also Technovore has a mind of its own. I also don't understand his relationship with his father, or at least what the movie was trying to communicate with me. The main villain said he has no emotional attachment with his father, but then we saw a little scene where it's made it very clear that his father was very pushy and strict with his grades, which may have psychologically damaged him. And the thing is, I don't know how I'm supposed to connect the main villain with his father. They seem to emphasize it a lot, even to the point where they tied in his father's death with Tony Stark. And that's another thing I can't stand about this movie. I don't understand its goal. I don't know what the story is trying to achieve. A lot of things happen, and when you try to piece them all up together, while there's definitely a coherent line that connects all events, you can't really decipher what are you supposed to get out of this movie, because the combination of everything that happened doesn't really have any message and goal, reaction, or impression that it wants to get out of us. It's just nothing but moving pictures with sounds and explosions and robots and the Punisher. There's no real character developments present here. This movie is the definition of pointless. The only thing I can praise this movie for is that it's not a clusterfuck. It's just kind of goalless. This doesn't feel like an inspired story. Nevertheless, I think this is better directed visually than the television shows. The shot composition is better, the action scenes are better animated, the Ironman suit never looks out of place with the frame, I like Tony's design a lot more than the television shows, I like how they use Ironman's theme song in certain scenes, I actually like Pepper Potts, I like her snarky personality and I think she has a good chemistry with Tony, and I guess in general this was an average movie. Totally pointless, but it had some recognizable strengths it can't go overlooked. Although I have to clarify that what I define as strength isn't necessarily high class. Actually, it's not high class at all. I could name a billion other shows with better animation and cast of characters, and I'm only referring to shows. If we're talking about movies, this is an even bigger disadvantage. I just simply think that the few non-incompetent things they offered were at least serviceable, and for that, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Okay, only one movie left and I'm done. This is the longest video I've made in this channel that's not unscripted. So how are we gonna end this little franchise? Avengers Confidential, Black Widow, and The Punisher. Hey, I remember this movie. I saw it back in 2015, I think. I wonder if it holds up. It was alright. I think out of all the characters I've seen in Marvel anime, Black Widow has the best design color-wise. I mean, sure, the original character designer of the comics is the one that deserves the most credit, but I've always liked the combination of her dark and blue outfit with her red hair. I also appreciate how her hair looks more lively than every other color that came before. I enjoyed the moral ambiguity of the Punisher's character. His conversation with Nick Fury was definitely thought-provoking and probably my favorite scene in the movie. Natasha, Castle, and Nick Fury are nice characters with charming and memorable personalities and were the heart of the movie in terms of creating conflict. I like how they took advantage of the shading effect to create gritty shots, but other than that, this was another 6 out of 10. Elias is a moron, don't really like how they slowed down their sequences, the story was boring, the music was boring except when Iron Man showed up, and generally this was, well, just another reincarnation of Marvel anime. That's it, I'm done. I finished watching and reviewing Marvel anime. So what did I learn from this experience? 1. Logan looks better when he's skinnier. 2. Vampires are not cool. Never realized this, but now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever found the concept of a vampire to be all that intriguing. And Blade just ended up confirming that. And 3. Marvel, I respect your decision to do experiments and giving full creative freedom to Madhouse, although your experiment didn't go well. I don't know how successful this was because weirdly I can't find any information related to that online, but given how no one really talks about it, it probably didn't get the fan following that you expected. There are some other Japanese cartoons based on Marvel that were made after that Marvel anime project, but to be honest, I don't think I'm gonna check them out. Maybe I will, but right now I'm just tired of average, because that's the main thing to take away from all of this. These shows are more or less okay. They're not awful, but I also don't think anyone deserves to experience something that's below good. If you're curious, I guess you should check them out, although you could just watch Symbionic Titan and give that show attention because that's pretty much my life goal, to revive Symbionic Titan. So to end this video, I think I'd much rather stick with the Marvel Cinematic Universe because I actually like what they're doing. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this however long video. Bye for now.